Good evening, everybody, and thank you for making time to join us today for our learning meetup, where we're going to be discussing the Systems Awareness Guide. Asen, our hub lead, is going to be leading us in this discussion, and it will be divided in two parts. A few minutes to discuss the concepts, and then a little bit of more time to get into an exercise where we'll be looking at perspectives, understanding different perspectives, understanding how people perceive their role in a particular system. So over to you, Asen.
Thank you so much, Linda. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for making the time to join us. Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. As Linda mentioned, my name is Asen. Today, I'm going to be facilitating with the support of my other colleagues from the hub. We're going to have a discussion on Systems Awareness Guide. This is one of the guides that is part of the systems theory. Systems theory. We will go through the whole journey of systems awareness, as Linda mentioned. We will start by presenting the topic, and later on we'll get into the discussions. As you can see here, so this guide, if you want to access it, it's on the SI web. It's easily accessible. In fact, I will drop the link in the chat, so those who haven't had the chance to look at it can go have a look. Why this guide? Because we started this journey where we are exploring systems thinking, and we understand that for you to be able to intervene in the system, you need to understand the system where you form part. And this guide is quite central to that, because it teaches you, it gives you a sense of your perception yourself as an individual, as a researcher or technocrat, or whoever is working in the system. It gives you a clear understanding of how do you make a decision when you are part of a system. Like, what are the elements that you need to understand when you're making this decision? So we will start by introducing the Systems Awareness Guide, as I say. So as you can see there, we're talking about the journey to systems level innovation start with first assessing and becoming aware of the system we want to intervene. This awareness of whole system is the foundation of systems innovation, and it's called system awareness. And that's what, as I mentioned, we'll be covering. We'll be talking about reflexive thinking. It's going to give us a perception, our perception as an individual when we talk about making an intervention in the system. So reflexive thinking is about becoming aware of how our thinking actually shapes what we see and what we do, and the world we create, which then feeds back to shape our thinking. And that is done through an ongoing loop, if I can put it like that. But for me not to do it in a way that is more lecturing, I think we should maybe open the floor to those who took the chance. You know, we said we need to go look at the guide. So I will open the floor to ask people participant in this meeting to also share their experience as we are going through the guide. What did you learn?
Okay, I'll start. Yeah, I think when you're talking about what we see and what we do and how that shapes the world that we create, I was just coming from a meeting now where I was able to see a different perspective of one other party that might have been looked at as inconsiderate in a situation. So it made me realize that as an individual, I have my own way of seeing things, and the way I feel about those things, and the kind of emotions that arise in me because of the things that I see, actually then determine the judgment that I make. So, and the example that, well, I was in a meeting where we were talking about mining companies and communities and the conflicts that do happen between mining companies and communities, and realizing that I do have a lot of experience working with communities. I feel for them. I know what they're going through. I know the pain that they experience, due to these economic activities, mining activities taking place. But hearing the side of the mining company was just like mind-blowing for me, to understand the real challenges that they face. And it's not that they are being evil or inconsiderate, but they also have their own reality, which is how they see the world, how and that determines what decision they take. So yeah, that was just like an eye-opener for me to understand that, yeah, it's really good to have a systems awareness, because then you are able to see from all these perspectives of the different actors in the system.
I like the example of the mine, because that's what is happening a lot in this side of the world here. Where investment is coming, funding common ground. The mining is coming with the idea of making an investment in the community, but there are policies also in place. It's a community where the project is going to take place, and perspectives, like a different perspective in that space. And I like that example. Yes, Joss? Joss, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, I was just thinking about it at lunchtime, actually. I went out into the park near here and sat and had lunch. It was a lovely sunny day and everyone was there enjoying their lunch. And I was looking at it and I was thinking, well, there's two kind of paradigms for looking at this one, right? One is that, oh, this is great. They have all their work under control and all their bills paid and they're having a good life. And it's good that they should, have a good quality of life and put that before work. Or you could come along and say, well, they should be working, right? Why are they so lazy? Why, other people have a really difficult time and they're all here in the park just lying around and chatting in the sunshine, And I could see really clearly there's two different paradigms, right? One paradigm is like, well, work is the most important thing and you should be working hard. And the other one is like, life is the most, quality of life is the most important. And when you, from each of those, if you have that paradigm, then you're going to look at that situation, exact same situation, and frame it and come to totally different understanding of it than taking the other one.
On its own, yeah.
That's a good one. That's a good way of putting it, Joss. I like that, because isn't it, we're talking about system thinking, our way of seeing the world, and the way we see the world places great emphasis on the question, like, how do we then act? How, like, yeah, it defines the action that we're taking is based on our perception, which is quite, it's quite interesting one. Thanks, Joss.
But it's also the thing I was just recognizing that, and most of the people who are coming in with that paradigm, they wouldn't recognize that they have the paradigm, right? They just look at it and derive certain insights and say, oh, that's the situation. They wouldn't even recognize that, oh, I have a paradigm that places work as the most important thing. And that's why I'm coming to the conclusion. And you can still use, isn't it? Because it's about what's the most important, what's the most valuable thing in life, right? I think that's what really shapes paradigms, but quite often we aren't aware of our paradigms, and that's why we get so much conflict, isn't it? People come in with different paradigms, and then we argue within our frame of reference about who's right, and we don't see the context, right? And if we could, then we could start to negotiate that and come to a better understanding.
And that's a good point that you're mentioning, Joss. It's good to set it like that, because toward the end of this discussion, we're going to have to exercise our brain by using the the elephant canvas, and we will try and do that to really like get people, give people the chance to see themselves in a particular system and defend why they think the position that they are holding in that particular system is important, and then later on change roles and get to allow people to see also things from a different perspective. If you are put in a certain position, you tend the decision that you make, it's influenced by your perception, but when they change roles, and then you begin to see things differently. It's a good point that you just mentioned. Yeah.
I think just at the back of your paradigm is another paradigm, and I guess it's a paradigm that's competing with your cognitive thinking about this. So at a front end of your brain, you kind of admiring the fact that people are being empowered, but in the back end of your reptilian brain, you're almost having this control need that kind of is conflicting with with the more aware side of your brain. And I think that's something we often have in business, and we want to empower people, and we talk the talk and we provide the opportunity, but there's a deep part of our brain that still worries deeply when we see people not actively working.
Yes. That's true.
I like I like Ian when you say the reptilian part of your brain.
Sorry, Josh, I didn't mean that. Didn't mean that you had reptiles in your brain.
Well, it's your brainstem, isn't it? But yeah, but I think it also shows how when you become aware of the paradigm, it creates a whole new space for innovation, doesn't it? It's like then you can innovate in the paradigm instead of just trying to innovate in how you're looking at the thing, And I think it creates a space for potentially resolving so many of the kind of conflicts we have in the world, right? I think many of them are a function. We don't understand how the difference between how we're looking at the world. We just operate within it and then come to conflicts within that context. Yeah.
Doesn't that also talk to the fact that we prize action rather than reflection? And so we tend to do a lot more action than reflection. Conscious reflection would cause us to think about what we're seeing and to think through it in a more systemic way.
Yeah, indeed. And for many people, it's too abstract, all this paradigm stuff. They haven't, a lot of people just can't deal with that abstract. It's kind of metacognition, thinking about thinking, isn't it? That's, or awareness of your thinking.
Yeah.
Many of us really developed, we're not able to, but yeah.
Yeah, but that's what the point that Jan made make me actually think of another concept that is parallel to what we are exploring here, because here we're talking about reflexivity, right? And when we talk about reflexivity, we're thinking of the reflection process, that reflection process and how it shapes our worldview. While the reflective, which is different with reflexive, is like reflective thinking practice is now focusing more on becoming more aware of your own thoughts, at the individual level. But then when you move to reflexibility, you start to think of how those thoughts now are, influencing your process and how, action that you are taking is going to further on shape the world. Because it's about, when you talk about reflexive thinking, you think of, like, you start asking yourself questions to know, for instance, how or in what way do I see the system from a self-centered perspective, which is I find quite different when you think of the other paradigm. Yeah.
But I think, like I totally agree with what Ian says. I think there's two levels. There's like the reptilian, the brainstem, which is kind of programmed in a way to respond in particular ways, and then we have consciousness, which can actually change that. And someone showed me recently the idea of a double loop learning. You have one loop, which is a programmed reaction and response, and then there's a potential of another loop, which is to change that program, right, and then react and respond in a new way. So that comes from cybernetics, where people were thinking about, they were studying control systems like a thermostat in your house that's programmed to, you know, change the heat at a certain temperature. But then you, as a more intelligent creature, can come in and you can change the temperature. You can program that differently, right? Which is what I think what we're getting at here, this second loop kind of learning, where the paradigm shapes how we, you know, the program that we operate on every day, and our potential to change that, to get our potential to change the way we kind of program ourselves to get very different outcomes.
Can I say something, Asen?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, okay. So from what Jost is saying, I'm thinking about metacognition, you know, like that process of trying to examine the processes by which we think about and arrive at the way we think, you know, like by the way we think, I mean, what we then set in our mind is, this is what I believe in. So, and it basically just involves analyzing your cognitive process and then adjusting, like what Jost just mentioned now, adjusting that. So how do you now aim to improve your clarity, your accuracy, your depth and breadth, and your logical consistency of your thinking? I think when you start thinking critically, that's when you now get to have an awareness of the system as a whole, to a certain extent. Of course, we are only human. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what is interesting is that a systems view really only takes you down to a certain level. You know, if you look at the work of causal layered analysis, where you go from the issue to the systemic causes, then down to the kind of worldview, which is more values-based, and then to the myths and metaphors that we tell each other to reinforce it, some of which are almost collectively passed through civilizations and generations. You know, that's really interesting for me, where we start to move just from the individual cognition to some of the layers that are external to us, and that are so deep-rooted in our society, or deep-rooted in the culture and values of an organization for whom we've worked.
Yeah. Thanks, Ian, for that contribution. Linda, you touched on something, touch on the critical thinking, and that also is making me to think of this whole concept of ego versus ecosystems thinking. Anyone want to comment on that? Let me just move there. Anyone want to comment on this?
Well, I think I could maybe add my 2 cents. So ego's sort of systems thinking is for the individual goal, right? So you have a sort of individualist thinking and way of doing things that may get you far, but not as far as you would want, especially if you want to impact greater society. So obviously on the flip side, we have what is called ecosystem, you know, taking into consideration the networks and who is impacted, and also being sensitive to what is happening on the ground as it is. Given the network, you have an opportunity to have sort of far-reaching achievements at the end of the day. So yeah, I think those are sort of my thinkings.
I've experienced it in one of the projects I'm working on now. I'm thinking along these lines of when I've created a piece of technology and I've just concentrated on what I want the piece of technology to do without really taking a broader, expanded a perception of what would be more useful for the user that's interacting with this application. So kind of experienced it in that sense.
And the context that they're in, right, when they're using that technology is what it's getting at, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. In Cape Town here, we had a meeting with the City of Cape Town, the Urban Waste Management Department. And they said one interesting thing that, okay, so when we went into the community, they were complaining that the city is not doing its job collecting waste. This is in an informal settlement. When we had the meeting with the city officials, they say to us, look, what happens in the informal settlements is that there are so many illegal connections of electricity, so many wires crossing over, and there are no boundaries and limits to the height and all of that. So our trucks can't get into the community to collect waste. And now listening to both sides, and they've not been able to be in one place where they can explain to each other, you understand, to say, this is my problem. So that's how I see, like, I'm just using that as an example of ecosystem. So if you look at the city council, they'll say, we can't go collect waste because there's illegal electricity connections. We can't get our trucks in there. There'll be accidents, right? But when you talk to the community, they're complaining, and they can actually go protest on the road and make more distractions because they're looking at the system from their own perspective and how the system should actually serve them, and not looking at other actors and what other actors have to be experiencing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great example.
Maybe just to add, oh, sorry.
No, carry on, sorry.
No, go ahead, Ian.
No, sorry, I'm just saying it's a great example, and I think it's something that if you look at the large scale change movement of the past 30 or 40 years, there's been this understanding that you need to bring the system into the room to really talk to itself, to be able to have those kind of vital conversations. Even if it's not the whole system, if it's a critical mass of the system, that at least allows for a representative sample to have those kind of dialogues, and so that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. I saw Sheldon, you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, just jumping off of what Linda was saying. So if you are sort of operating from that egocentric view, more times than not, you create unintended consequences because you don't have the entire room in the system in the room, and when you are creating innovation, at least system-wide innovation, you want it to sort of seamlessly be accepted across the system. And when you create from an ego point of view, you have impact sometimes negatively.
Yeah. It's like that story in India of the cobra effect. Have you heard of that?
Yeah. That's an exciting one.
No.
It's a very good example.
Haven't heard that one before.
No, it's when the British were going around the world, beating everyone up and colonizing everywhere. They were in India and they had a problem, right, with cobras. So they reacted to that problem by trying to get rid of the cobras. There were too many of them. So they said they'd pay, I don't know, 1 penny for each dead cobra, and this would, hopefully fix the problem, right? It was the solution. They're the silver bullet, right? And they did that. They implemented that, and it was actually successful. They had good progress in the short run. And then after a while, they thought they got rid of all the cobras. They stopped the program, and then suddenly they got a massive wave of cobras coming at them everywhere, and they couldn't figure out why. So they said, what's going on here? And they discovered that the locals had been farming cobra to get these pennies, right? And when they no longer got the money, then they let all their cobras go, and it all came back to normal. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good one. That's a
instead of fixing, just trying to find a solution, right? And not trying to understand the system's dynamics, which is what we're trying to get at.
Yeah, exactly. Systems dynamic is an important point, Jose. I like that. So it's really about starting with the understanding that how we see the world and some of the limitations that exist in our way of thinking. It's central. And I will show this graphic where it's good to illustrate when you're talking about system map, but also in this context, because it's about system awareness, right? So getting beyond our individual perspective to see the system, and from that build a shared understanding and the foundation for the shared action is what we should all be looking for. But another important point on that, I believe that as we were working in a system, we all intervening in a system, we also need a kind of leadership, right? Because in leadership here, by leadership, I don't mean hierarchy kind of model, but leadership in a way that is if you are giving an opportunity to make or to influence somewhere in a system, how your thinking in that position can actually shape the outcome of the process. Because systems thinking is about leading across boundaries, and this is done with little authority. Let me just go here. And then when you are addressing large-scale challenges and you want to make a big difference, you need kind of a different kind of methodology that are significantly different with the current one. And in this graphic, I'm showing the old conventional type of leadership versus systems leadership. I don't know, any one of you had a chance to read the section about leadership, systems leadership. Any comments you have on this?
I think possibly my my comment would be that often when we map systems, we tend to map the formal system as opposed to the informal system. And yet, so often it's the informal system that actually gets things done. It's the relationships that people have with others, that they can pick up a phone irrespective of where they are on the org chart and kind of call in a favor or, encourage somebody to do something, and it happens. And so I think that that's where this whole socio-technical combination, we can become very scientific about it and be very good at the technical side. I don't think we have all of the tools to truly understand the kind of social side in the way we should.
Yeah, that's an important point. I like the part that you are mentioning, formal and informal. Yeah, definitely interventions. When we're making interventions here, we tend to focus on the formal systems, not knowing that informal also. Who are the stakeholders in that space? What power do they have? How do you play with power dynamics within the system, be it formal and informal, to make decisions that influence the outcome? I see, Joss, you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah. Well, it relates to this. So the thing I've been thinking about a lot, actually, I was going to post a question in the community, but I wasn't sure if it would make sense. But it relates to what we're talking about here, and that question too is we're talking about awareness, right? And systems awareness is what the guide is about. And I think I've been thinking about, like, what's the relationship between intuition and awareness? Because they're very closely related, aren't they? When you're unaware of something, you're insensitive to it and you have no sensibility to it, and you have no intuition for it, really. But when you become aware of something, it starts, you have an intuition, you start to build an intuition for it, and it comes natural to you. So the question I was going to ask in the community, and I probably will later on, is like, if we have the thing of systems awareness, then what's that intuition, a systems intuition, where we have a sense of the system instead of, you know, a lot of the time we seem to get really smart with our PhDs and our technical stuff and all of this, but we get really stupid at the same time, don't we? To really like look at this sustainability crisis. It's just so stupid, isn't it? We're running off, the system is running off a cliff, even though we've got so smart at, you know, engineering plastics and, you know, bioplastics or whatever, the whole thing. We haven't got an intuition, we haven't got an awareness for it. So we don't seem to have an intuition for it. And I think that's related. I'm not sure how exactly to what you talk about, Ian, in terms of the informal. I think the intuition can give us a sense for the whole system, the informal and the formal.
So I guess there's two sides to that for me. The one is this kind of journey from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence to unconscious competence to conscious competence to unconscious competence, and that's kind of a journey that after a while it just seeps into, you know, into our being. And I guess from that side, I see a positive benefit out of it. I think the other side of intuition is kind of in line with how our brain from a neuropsych perspective has been structured. And so it's a lot to do with past experience that may or may not be valid in a particular new context. So as we move into the future, and in particular where the future is less like the past, it becomes, it doesn't become as useful as it could be.
Yes, Yasmin.
I just want to comment in relation to this topic of intuition and things like that. I understand that we normally focus a lot of our attention in trying to understand how can we understand things from our brains, and I feel that's that kind of blinds us for what out there, the potential that it's beyond just focusing on the brain. So I understand that, for example, what Joss was mentioning in relation to PhDs and courses and things like that, you just focus on one aspect of what life and learning and developing is about. And you don't comprehend that you are a lot more than just learning, memorizing things. It's a lot more about the practical experience of things. You learn a lot more when you're embedded in an environment that you can experience with other parts of what it's you, more than you just reading a textbook or something like that. And the practical, the tacit experience and the tacit learning that you get from just experiencing sometimes is a lot greater than just reading something on a textbook and, you know, memorizing and things like that. So yeah, I understand that it's just focusing on other areas as well, what makes us humans in general, more than just the brain. Just a little comment on this intuition. And yeah.
I think it becomes particularly important in the context of complexity, because you can't know a very complex system. So what do you do when you can't know the system, right? I think intuition has to play a greater role.
Yeah, and this is taking us back to the conversation that Linda was talking about, the point when he was talking about critical thinking. You know, how do you distinguish between valid or invalid source of information and processes for reasoning? And to me, when you start putting all this together, then you get to shifting your thinking, even when you make decisions, you know, like your worldview, actually, your decisions you become more aware of the things that you're making. And as going back to the example of Linda, when she was talking about the waste management example, you know, through that kind of engagement, and you get to a point of facilitating people to see that what you might think is the solution and the way you go and intervene is probably not necessarily the way you need to make that change that you require. You need to look at other aspects. You need to take into consideration other elements, and yeah, that's how you begin to shift your thinking. But I'm checking the time. I think we should move quickly to the exercise. Remember, we mentioned that we'll be doing a small exercise, and we're going to use the elephant canvas. We will be able to exercise our brain a little bit, exercise our thinking from ego and eco, as we said, and try and see two different perspectives. So we're going to use this canvas. So this is done with the reference to the story of the elephant and the blind man. I'm sure we all know it. Which it's there to illustrate how each person only sees one part of the elephant from their perspective, leading to an absence of understanding the whole system. And the example that we're going to do today, the system that I feel we should work with, given the time and the number of participants that we have here, we take the easier one. We can choose the education system. So let's think, if we're dealing with the education system, right? Yeah, what I'm going to ask you to do, guys, is to try and think of who are the actors, the different actors that exist in the current education system. I mean, you can think of your context and know the different actors that exist in the education system and their roles. So please, I'm gonna drop the, Linda, maybe you can help me drop the link.
Yeah, I'm doing it now.
So let's think of the actors in the education systems. Let's put the role of the different actors that exist in the education systems, and let's talk about those actors' perspective when it comes to operating in the education systems. I see people started posting already, so let's do this small exercise and have a conversation about that. I would say, let's give ourselves maybe 5 minutes or 4 minutes or 2 minutes. And as we're writing, let's also think of the roles that they are playing in the education system. Okay, let's pick a few. So just, you want to tell us about this? I mean, I'm more interested to know about the roles that they are playing in the system, and if you have to see things differently, because later on we'll get to the point where we will try and change roles so that we can see in different perspectives. So if you can tell us a little bit about the stuff that you put here.
Yeah. So they're all looking at the system in their own way, aren't they? The book publishers. I think we all get stuck into a certain paradigm, certain role, don't we? If we think we're the book publishers, well, then it's probably a commercial activity, isn't it? And we're looking at the system about how we produce books and generate revenue and how many books are needed and what's going to be needed in the future. And maybe we're scared about digitalization and so forth because our books aren't going to be needed. So I'd say the general framing book publishers is kind of a commercial one. Teacher trade unions are obviously looking out for the perspective of the teachers and concerned about their working conditions and their pay and so forth. So they're looking from the perspective of the teacher. And I guess, yeah, they all have incentives, don't they? They have a paradigm. They have certain values, like for the teacher trade union, it's better that teachers are looked after and have plenty of holiday time, isn't it? I guess there's other people here who might want this, going back to my park work analogy, there's other people who might want them working more, and the trade union teachers are probably thinking they should be working less and they should be getting paid more and so forth. So I guess thinking about the whole dimension is how they're looking at what's their value system, what's their incentives, so on and so forth.
Yeah. That's important. Yes, Linda.
For me, I would like to, look at the role of the parent and understand that generally, and speaking from an African perspective, historical perspective, the education system that we have now is something that is foreign, if I can put it like that. So parents had played a very, very critical role in the education system in history. So with this current system, as a parent, I would probably be looking at what kind of education is my child getting, what values are they being taught, not just looking at the curriculum and the subjects that is studying mathematics and science and all, but looking at the development of a person as a whole. So I think parents also kind of place that responsibility on schools because they are busy with other things, and then the children are spending most of their time in school. So the parents now have that kind of expectation on the system to build their children to be whole people, not just academic machines. Yeah. So yeah, from a parent's perspective, I would think like that.
Thanks, Linda. Who else wanna go?
I can contribute to that, like from a parent's perspective. I was thinking about the education system and I was kind of confused. The pedagogy, so meaning the methodology of teaching. I feel like it's based on very outdated techniques, like force feeding information into learners, like memorization of the longest river or the biggest mountain. And I think these cause like it's more dropout rates in schools because there's a lack of effective teaching methods and stimulation in children, and a lack of interest in the learners to actually like think creativity or actually be involved in the learning instead of being force-fed information. And then I also think that with regard to like performance reviews and social pressures, I think that you get put a lot of pressure on your ranking, your scores in education system, and this puts so much pressure on the learner, and then it also leads them to, okay, what university am I going to go to? Where will I be accepted? And then it also leads to like the inequality in the educational system because like you aren't allowed to go there because you have low marks, or I don't know. And then also spiraling costs of like learners and education. I think that also breeds inequality, because we have people who can't really afford education, and then they get kicked to the curb straight away because they can't afford the education, and the government, they have no funding from governments anymore. So yeah.
Yeah, I think tying into that and tying into Linda's issue as well around parents, is the whole role of the community. There's an African proverb that, it takes a village to bring up a child. And I think that in particular, as we move into this fourth IR world where, I don't know, I'm very pessimistic about the level of jobs being created versus the jobs that are being displaced. And so if we start to look at universal income grants and all these kind of things, do we recognize when members of a community take the time out to also work with children in sports, or to teach them to read, or to do drama and build creativity? And is that not part of recognizing social contribution? And how do we make sure that there is almost a well-managed tension between education at a community level and education that equips children for life outside of that community? And so that's a bit of a garbled mix of things, but I just think that this community side is something that really takes a lot more thought.
That's a very important point, Ian, that you mentioned. I think that's where we're coming from, because everybody in their corner, as you were speaking, I was actually thinking of curriculum creator that just put here, when they design curriculum, because they're thinking that learners have to learn this to get this particular skill that will be relevant for them when they finish university. But then if we have to think outside that perspective, if you have to shift your perspective and think of parents, for instance, or student, for instance, looking at the background, the social context or background where they're coming from, looking at, the family conditions and looking at the job market itself, it might not be, the content of the curriculum might not be the one that is needed, to make that particular change when you want to create, for instance, opportunity for employment. And that's what we've seen in most cases here. Same with the Department of Education. What the education system thinks as being priority might not necessarily be the priority for the student, or might not even be able to make that impact that they want to make to change our education systems. And often if people, and this goes back to the previous graphics that I showed. So when you think of people are working in isolation, when they work in isolation, everybody thinks that whatever I do is good for me to achieve this particular impact. So, but when people are working in silos, and the impact is quite different, that it's not always not made to address systemic roots. Yet when you work together, you can see things through the different lens of the system, and make sure that as you're doing your intervention on the ground, you can achieve different results. And that's what this exercise was helping us, like moving away from your perspective to see things from other people's perspective, as we were doing it here in a small exercise. So what parents means or see as priority might not be the same with what the Department of Education is seeing. And so that's the importance of applying this reflexivity, and also thinking of ecosystem versus ecosystem thinking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your contribution, your participation. But before you go, please, we would like to get your feedback on this. Take your time. We don't have to do it online. Please, since you have the link, just take your time to answer these two questions that we have here. Thanks everyone for your participation. Please stay tuned. Stay connected to our community site. We will have more of these events where we'll be unpacking guides, systems innovation and systems change guides. Just let me remind that this is a journey that we're starting. It's part of capacity building. So we're not going to put people in the training room, but we will be discussing like that, and that's gonna help us like get the kind of awareness that we need, so that when we want to work on systems change tomorrow, we know what are the issues that we need to take into consideration. Thank you everyone for making the time, and see you in the next meeting.
Thank you all. Great
Bye-bye.
joining your community today. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you,
Thanks, Ian. Thank you.
Bye-bye.